Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Michael Schreffler, Associate Dean for the Arts in the College of Arts and Letters here at Notre Dame, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to Ahead of the Game, a football season lecture series sponsored by the college. Over the course of the season, we'll be hearing from faculty from all over the college on a wide range of topics, from video gamers as researchers, to writing a first novel, to the economics of baby booms and busts. I hope to see many of you on October 14th, that's the next home game, when a panel of faculty experts from the Rooney Center for the Study of American Democracy will discuss some of the issues at stake in the 2022 midterm elections. Before introducing today's speaker, I'd like to thank our colleagues in the Department of Music and the program in Sacred Music for welcoming us into their well-appointed building and concert hall. I'd also like to acknowledge Becky Badger. Becky is here, Senior Administrative Coordinator in the Dean's Office, who worked with our speaker and the Communications Office and many others to make this series happen. Our speaker today is Heather Hyde Minor, professor in the Department of Art History, and Design. Professor Minor has published widely on the art and architecture of Rome, where she recently completed a term as the academic director of Notre Dame's Global Gateway. With her collaborator, Caroline Yerkes, she curated Piranesi Unbound, an exhibition at Princeton University on the 18th century printmaker, architect, and archaeologist Giovanni Battista Piranesi, which was accompanied by a deeply researched and beautiful exhibition catalog. So I encourage you to take a look at it. Professor Minor's talk today, though, takes a different tack, focusing on material she and her students at Notre Dame, some of whom I believe are here, have discovered in a course she teaches regularly on buildings and curious objects and images here on campus. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to my good friend and colleague, Heather Hyde Minor.
Thank you so much, Michael, and good afternoon, Irish men and women. The first question I'm supposed to ask you is, can you hear me? Yes. Okay, we're in business. I'm delighted to be here with you today to talk about some of my research and especially my teaching. But before I do that, I'd like to thank Patrick Milhoan, Jean McManus, and Joe Smith at the University Archives. We'll be seeing some of the objects they take care of in my talk today. Natasha Leandros and all of the other incredible colleagues in Rare Books and Special Collections here in the Hesburgh Library. And finally, a very, very special friend of mine and of Notre Dame, Denise Chivarelli, who is just a jewel in Our Lady's crown. I'm just thrilled that she's with us today. Okay, let's get started. So my focus today, and I know very well, right, it's a beautiful day outside. I'm the only thing standing between you and the bar, or being in the sun, or whatever it is, thinking great, powerful thoughts to support our team. So I'm going to limit myself today to about 35 minutes so we can have some time for questions. I'm going to get down to business, get down to the point. My focus today is going to be Our Lady's University, a subject we all know well, or at least think we do. I'm going to share with you how examining our campus as an art historian, from my point of view, my discipline, might change the way it looks to you and deepen your understanding of Notre Dame past and present. To do this, I'm going to talk about a USEM, a university seminar I taught last spring called Notre Dame and Its Artifacts. For the purposes of my course, and I've just put it up here on the screen for you, an artifact is defined simply as an object made or modified by humans, so a very broad category. Every freshman has to take one of these writing-intensive seminars, which are offered in every department and take up every possible subject you can imagine. How many of you have an artifact from Notre Dame? Raise your hands, right? Right? Maybe it's a pennant, a much-loved t-shirt. Perhaps it's your diploma with a speck of gold from the dome. a play like a champion today sign. Objects like these are precious to us. We collect and display them. Artifacts like them are everywhere on our campus. While this may not surprise you, their enormous number and great diversity may. They range from the kangaroo skeleton purchased by Father John Zahm to teach evolution in the 1890s. You can just catch let's see if I can do this correctly, a glimpse of it right here is that kangaroo skeleton that he bought. To teach evolution at exactly the same time Darwin was first publishing his ideas about evolution, to Father Sorin's glasses, to the costume worn by a professional wrestler in the 1920s, that's at the center here of the screen, complete with original sweat stains, as my students can attest, to this beautiful 17th century Dutch painting on the left in the Snight Museum. So why study things? Why do people in my discipline of art history do this? And why do I think it's worth teaching students to do it? I'm going to start with how and why art historians study artifacts. Like historians, art historians gather primary and secondary sources, using them to forward new interpretations about the past. Unlike other kinds of historians, art historians give particular emphasis to works of art, taking them as both evidence and the subject of their scholarship. We examine paintings, sculpture, architecture, photographs, and prints. Here are just some examples of the kinds of things we study. These all taken from our wonderful campus Snight Art Museum. These works of art are treated as a special class of historical objects because of their aesthetic and sometimes spiritual dimensions. I can't think of a better example of the beautiful and the spiritual to show you than Michelangelo's Pietà. This spectacular marble sculpture was made for the tomb of a French cardinal. As an art historian, I would examine how it was made, literally how Michelangelo sculpted this block of marble, how it was used after he made it, what might have inspired Michelangelo's depiction of Christ and his mother, along with a whole range of other questions. After looking carefully and describing the sculpture, I would conclude that it is a devotional object, meaning that Michelangelo designed it to be seen up close by a viewer who would use it to deepen an individual, a personal religious experience, not one together with a congregation or a group of others. In trying to understand why the artist decided to place Christ in his mother's lap as if he were a child rather than a 33-year-old man taken down from a cross, an art historian would connect it to the mystical writings of Michelangelo's contemporary, Saint Bernardino of Siena, who describes Mary in her overwhelming grief, holding her dead son, and entering a kind of dream state in which she returns to Bethlehem. And here's a close-up of her face. In this transcendent moment, Mary is cradling her newborn son. With her eyes barely open, she is with us and elsewhere, traveling back in time, back to the moments when she held her newborn son. There are many other questions and associations an art historian would make in looking at this sculpture, but I think you get the sense that this powerful artifact can tell us about all kinds of things, from how Catholicism was practiced in the 1400s to how artists realized and transformed theological ideals and more. Oops, I put this in here. I forgot. Look at this beautiful face. I think this is one of the most amazingly beautiful faces in the whole history of art, Christ's face. While works of art have traditionally been understood to be paintings, sculpture, architecture, drawings, or prints, today we take up a much wider range of material artifacts. In my class, we look at objects as evidence to learn the history of Notre Dame. Students learn to think like art historians by looking carefully at artifacts to describe them, analyzing them, and posing research questions about them. And I'm showing you this image here taken last winter. This is class of 17, Sophia Bevacqua Collins, an alumna of the university. She was my research assistant for 2 years, helping me to put together this show, this exhibition that was held at Princeton. And here she's looking at a set of drawings that were made actually on pieces of scratch paper, made on pieces of trash paper, literally. Artifacts express the values of a culture. By studying them, we can understand the beliefs of a group or society at a given time. Artifacts convey meaning. One of the bedrock ideas of art history is that objects made or modified by humans reflect, consciously or unconsciously, the beliefs of individuals or communities. But surely people have expressed and do express their beliefs more clearly in their words and deeds than the artifacts they make, you may be thinking. I would contend that the significance we associate with certain artifacts makes them special. But there are other reasons to study objects. Here are just two. Since only a small percentage of the world's population has historically been literate, artifacts offer a way to understand the great majority of people, past and present, who do not write. We also know that biases are not always recorded in texts, but we can often uncover them through careful study of artifacts cultures produce. To make this concrete, here are a handful of examples from my class. We know about early life on campus from many sources. Menus, for example, I'm going to show you one in just a moment, give a sense of what students and faculty ate. But we learned something different about early campus food when we looked to an archaeological dig conducted by Professor Mark Schur and Notre Dame students near Old College, and I'm showing you them at work here. They got really lucky and found what was one of the campus dumps. Trash can tell us all sorts of things, right? We know this. Now, in that garbage heap are many bones of, you want to guess? Squirrels. Imagine being a Notre Dame freshman and learning this, right? So, these bones show signs of butchering. So what can we make of this discrepancy between the evidence we find on the menus, and here's a menu, early-ish menu, that just tells us that about when the new dining hall was constructed, that they're serving 2,500 pounds of meat daily. They don't tell us what kind of meat, right? But we can imagine that it's in there with the nationally advertised products like Jell-O and Post products. These things we're very, very proud, apparently, to have been serving. Here, the artifact tells us something the written primary sources do not. First, students and faculty dined on squirrels. Second, and this is where we get to how the remains of the squirrels eaten for dinner, a main course that does not appear on any menu, might tell us something about the history and values of Notre Dame. Squirrels were, as they are today, abundant on campus. They were a cheap source of protein at a time when Notre Dame was struggling financially. Knowing that Notre Dame experienced serious financial hardships in its early years is something that the students in my class find remarkable, unimaginable in some cases. These squirrel bones tell us something about a resourceful, thrifty institution, as well as one that did not reveal to students reading campus menus that the source of the mystery meat on which they dined was squirrel. I'd like to turn to my second example from the class that teaches us something surprising about Notre Dame and its history, again focusing on what artifacts can tell us. Dorms have been an important part of life at Notre Dame since Sorin Hall was built in 1888 as the first purpose-built dormitory. Before then, everything from classrooms to sleeping spaces for students and faculty were housed in the main building, which you see on the right. Starting already in the 18th century, American universities looked to Oxford and Cambridge for inspiration to build our nation's new colleges. We'll come back to this later in my talk. The exterior of many of our buildings on campus follow these models imported from England even today. In 19th century America, when Notre Dame was founded, universities looked for prototypes for student living. This was not simply a way to solve the practical problem of how to house students in rural places where there were few options available, but the idea that living on campus would strengthen moral fiber and build character. I want us to look at one of our beloved dorms, considering it as an artifact. Here is Dillon Hall, built in 1925, the largest dorm on campus. The floor plan here on the screen is from the 1934-5 semester tuition and general fee book. When we look at the layout of campus dorms, we find they were built with a gracious main entrance, and you see that here, and it's here on the plan. Here's the main entrance of Dillon, with few other means of entering and exiting. Passing through the entrance, you would encounter the room of one of the rectors or faculty members assigned to live in the hall. Corridors with rooms on either side. You can see those corridors here and here with kind of like bookended rooms on either side of the corridor, with limited staircases, are the basic structure of Dillon. This is technically known as a double-loaded corridor, so impress people while you're having that cool beverage later on and talk to them about double-loaded corridors. You'll meet new friends. We find it in dorms all over the country. The rooms closest to the staircases were designated for rectors, rectors of religion, or faculty members. And you can see that here, for instance, this staircase here, these rooms here were assigned to rectors of religion. Controlling the entrances and exits as was a way to surveil and control students. Internal corridors with limited entrances were easier to monitor than rooms with doors that opened directly to the outside. These purpose-built, ordered structures were intended to encourage, but also control interaction among residents and subject them to the firm regulation of a rector or faculty member. You may have noticed that Dillon, at least as it was when it was first built, lacked common spaces for socialization, with perhaps the exception of the chapel here. The current renovation project at Dillon, one of the main objectives is to renovate the building so that it will have spaces for socialization inside it. With this description in mind, what would you guess the inspiration for this new kind of building the dorm was? The physical layout of dorms. The physical layout of dorms at Notre Dame copies that of insane asylums in America. Now, this is true of dormitories on many college campuses, as my colleague, Professor Carla Yanni, has demonstrated. So we are not unique or special in this. The first purpose-built mental hospital was constructed in Trenton, New Jersey in 1847. It quickly became the standard layout for asylums and later college dormitories. While there are some changes, right, like the addition to the chapel down here in Dillon, the double-loaded corridors, you see them here and here and here, the focus on a single entrance, which you see here and again down here, limited staircases, and lack of common areas in Dillon all closely relate to the New Jersey asylum. It was designed to provide an environment that shaped its residents' behavior, keeping them safe and under control. There are no written sources that I know of in the archives or elsewhere that describe any of this. It's through careful looking at the built environment of the dorm and comparison with other similar structures that reveal the relationship between mental institutions and dorms. Even seemingly easy to understand artifacts on campus can both surprise us and teach us about the history of our university. This Carling Black Label beer box can be found in our wonderful university archives. When we visit there as a class, I ask the students to handle it, to pick it up, to touch it, and also to describe it. They always remark on how sturdy and well constructed it is, with two flaps that fit down into it so you don't need to tape it shut, and these inset handles, one of which you can see on the screen. I asked them to speculate about it. Why do we have it in the archives? Why did someone keep it? Some guessed that it was confiscated from beer-drinking students. However, when we combine it with other visual evidence, like this photograph, we understand that this box was likely used in 1963 to move the contents of the Lemonnier Library to what we now know today as the Hesburgh Library. This artifact can tell us something about the thrifty ways of Notre Dame in the 1960s, where recycled boxes were used by clever librarians to move their books across campus. I want to look at one more building with you, a more complicated example of how artifacts can express the values of a community. Opened in 1937, Rockne served as a field house, but also as a memorial to Newt Rockne. First description, with its pointed arches and buttresses, so here we'll see pointed arches, buttresses, just two of them here, a bunch of them here. This building is an example of collegiate Gothic architecture. Academic Gothic emerged in the early 20th century in America as a way to emulate Ivy League schools. They, in turn, got their ideas from Oxford and Cambridge. Let's look a little more closely. Between the main two doors of the building, we find a sculpture of St. Christopher, perhaps best known to us as the patron saint of travelers. Above the large window in the center of the facade, there are two more sculptures. You can just make them out, one here and one here. Here we find Cavalier La Salle on the right, a 17th century explorer who may have been the first European to cross the Ohio and Mississippi rivers. On the left, paired with him, is this representation of Chief Simon Pokagon. Pokagon was the head of the Potawatomi tribe on whose land our university sits today. This is remarkable. To my knowledge, on no collegiate Gothic building on any campus anywhere can you find a representation of a Native American. I'll come back to this. If we continue around the building to the east and west sides, we find 12 sculptures of athletes. Football appears, as we would expect at Notre Dame, on a building dedicated to the memory of our most celebrated coach. But so does golf, baseball, fencing, and other sports. What can we deduce from all of this? Collegiate Gothic was something we borrowed from the Ivy League. In this first building built on our campus with these medieval or Gothic forms, we were attempting to emulate a group of universities that were academically and economically richer than Notre Dame was. It's worth noting that we did not do this with an academic building, but with one designed to provide a space for students to practice athletics and to commemorate Newt Rockne. The sports depicted on the east and west of the building included ones we played in the 1930s, like football, as well as a number that we did not. Representing golf, fencing, and other patrician sports highly prized by the Ivies was another way this building expressed the aspirations of Notre Dame. Material in the archives makes clear that boxing, considered a more violent sport, was rejected in favor of, you want to guess? Golf, exactly, right? Excellent. A more exclusive one. Here, in both the sports depicted and the way the building looks, we were trying to become an institution that could compete with that elite Ivy League group. St. Christopher, Chief Pokagon, and Cavalier La Salle express a more complex set of values. What can we understand about this? Why are these three figures here together, and what can it tell us about Notre Dame in the 1930s? Let's start from the top and work our way to the bottom. Cavalier La Salle passed through the area where our campus is in 1679. He claimed a number of territories for the French crown, at least before being murdered by his own men in 1687 in what is today Texas. On the left, we have an image of a Native American, likely Chief Simon Pokagon. A member of the Pokagon band of Potawatomi Indians, Simon Pokagon was an author who devoted his life to his tribe, seeking justice for them as their lands were stripped in a series of treaties with the US government. He was also a Catholic convert, one who opposed celebrating the legacy of Columbus. More on that in a second. Again, this is a unique example, to my knowledge, of a Native person on a collegiate Gothic building on a college campus anywhere. St. Christopher, known today as the patron saint of travelers, was better understood in the early 20th century as the namesake of Christopher Columbus. His appearance here makes sense as he joins La Salle and Chief Pokagon. Columbianism, as it was known, was a movement that used Columbus as a symbol to join the civil and religious identities of Catholics in America in the 19th and early 20th centuries. It was a response to the belief of elite Protestants that Catholics were subject to a foreign ruler, the Pope, whose influence they saw as a threat to the independence of American institutions. Notre Dame promoted its patriotism and allegiance to the United States by endorsing a Catholic version of the discovery and settlement of this country by Europeans. It was Columbus, a Catholic, who founded our nation according to these ideas. This served as proof that Catholics were missionaries to the New World, while indigenous peoples were the beneficiaries of their religious and cultural superiority. Of course, we see this differently today, but at Notre Dame in the 1930s, these figures told a story of the Catholic contribution to American history. What does all of this have to do with Rockne and football at Notre Dame? The fundraising brochure for the building stresses Rockne as, quote, a lover of all manly sports. He's described over and over again as a builder of men. As Notre Dame alum Mike Oriard points out in his brilliant books on football, it was a sport that was, quote, manly, because it distinguished between necessary roughness, a term often used at the time, and brutality. So football is not brutal, it's a game of strategy. It's a game where roughness only happens when it's necessary. It was also set apart from its working class rival prize fighting because football games took place at universities and relied on strategy and restraint. Rockne was an immigrant who became an American hero, a Protestant who converted to Catholicism. Here on the Rockne Fieldhouse, we see traces of a university trying to show Notre Dame's allegiance both to democracy and church authority. The, quote, civilizing force of Europeans like Columbus is not only cultural, but religious. Football was celebrated like collegiate Gothic architecture as a way to compete with the Ivies and the American Protestant elite. These sometimes contradictory values were embedded in this campus building at a time when we wanted to attract upper-class students without alienating the working and middle-class Catholic community that was our mainstay. I want to leave you today with one final example. It's one designed to terrify you, to terrify any student of this university, past or present. This is the so-called Black Book, and you can see its title there on its spine, which was used to record expulsions of students starting in 1867. We do not avoid textual evidence in this class, or as art historians, we combine objects and texts together. In my class, we work in the magnificent university archives, where the students also do independent research. We also read primary sources from Father Sorin's letters to the campus plan created by the Facilities Design and Operations Group. One of the most carefully guarded documents on this campus is that plan. I want to demonstrate to you how thinking like an art historian can change what the textual record seems to tell us. When we look at this as a class, we start by describing it as an object. And students remark on how big and heavy it is. And you can see with that pencil there, so I'm holding it in my arm, but I've got it resting on this, this foam stand because it's so heavy. And you can see with that little pencil there for scale that this is a massive book. This is not just a black book, but a very big black book. We look at the well-worn cover, scratched and battered with use. We examine the spine with its title. Together we hypothesize about how and where the book was kept, perhaps on a shelf. We read, and here's just a page open, make it bigger for you. We read some of the entries together. And these tell us a number of things, one of which is that, at least in the 19th century, administrators at the university had fantastic senses of humor. So this first student here is described as having the sign of the beast on his countenance, right? Not sure any of us would describe a student that way today. Further goes on to describe all the trouble that he got into, and that he eventually got into so much trouble, in fact, that he was expelled, but that the mayor of South Bend had to be called to put him in the city cooler, so to put him in the city jail and keep him there until he could be sent home to Chicago. As we look through this book, something interesting emerges. Many of the pages are blank, leading us to conclude this object was designed to appear threatening rather than to record the names of lots and lots of expelled students. Happily, there weren't very many. Sitting on a shelf behind a frowning administrator, or perhaps on the table in front of a cowering student, the size and scale of this book were designed to look menacing. Examining it as an artifact, we learn about the values of discipline here in the 1800s, but also that severe punishment, at least in the form of expulsion, seems to have been used only infrequently. The power of this artifact comes from how it looks. The skill of analyzing an artifact, of observing it and describing it, is new to many Notre Dame freshmen. Some are speculating and deducing after taking time to look closely. Thinking about artifacts as evidence is also novel to many first years. But these skills, so fundamental to art historians, are ones that are invaluable to our students, no matter what their majors or dreams for the future may be. Being able to combine forms of evidence to pose questions and solve problems is a skill all of our students should possess. Understanding the visual as well as the textual is one of the things art history teaches us. Looking more closely at the world around us and thinking critically about the profoundly visual environment in which we live, whether our beloved campus or someplace else, makes our students more powerful. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Heather. We have time for a few questions. I think Heather would welcome some questions or comments.
Happy to answer.
Is there any evidence on how they caught the squirrels for the meal?
I wish I could tell you that we did. If there is, I don't know about it. What I can tell you is that this is, we get to this quite early in this class, and it's really, devastating is too strong of a word, but it's a difficult moment for many students to accept, both because of the great warmth that the squirrels have or generate within us today, but also this idea that to imagine that the Notre Dame that we know, right, as this elite, wealthy, powerful place was in fact in its early days very tenuous, was a place in which pennies had to be pinched, and we had to be very, very careful, while at the same time, Father Sorin was very clever at this, maintaining a certain kind of image, right? By not telling you, times are hard and we're gonna eat squirrel for dinner tonight, right? But so I don't know any more about how we certainly also ate fish from the lake as well, so there's evidence for that from the dig. But the squirrels and the students, Notre Dame students are so wonderful and creative. They come up with a million reasons why these butchered bones are not butchered bones, and that they're there for some other reason, that we weren't in fact eating these squirrels. But I'm convinced by the evidence that we were eating squirrels. Yes.
You spent a lot of time on the design of the rock. Who was the architect? Was that person classically trained? If you said they looked to Princeton and Oxford for models?
Yeah. So basically, part of the story, and my wonderful colleague Johanna Siesenwein has written about this story of why all of a sudden do these collegiate Gothic buildings start springing up all over the United States of America. From East Coast to West Coast, this starts to happen in the 19th century, but especially in the early 20th century. And there are a number of reasons for this. One is that even though politically we went a different way from Britain, right? And we had a revolution, we formed our own nation. Culturally, we remained quite connected to England. And so that made, when we're looking to try to figure out what will our models be for campuses, this kind of collection of buildings that existed really only in Great Britain. If you think about great universities in Europe and think about, for instance, German universities, they're city universities. They don't have campuses with quads or greens or all of these things that we do in rural America, right? Starting from Cambridge, Massachusetts, from Harvard, which was rural when that university began in the 18th century, Harvard, all the way up until into the 20th century. So the building is a building designed by Cram, is the name of the architect, and he's a very well-known building. That building, do you want to guess what that building cost? 1930s, right? Depression. $1 million. Wow. This was incredible, right? An incredible expense and fundraising hill to climb, but done very successfully. And so that building becomes, when you walk around campus and see other collegiate Gothic buildings with those buttresses and those pointed arches, Rockne is where it all starts, and it continues to this day. So still in our campus planning guidelines, there's a strong preference given for continuing to build buildings that look like that, and to keep this kind of unified style of the campus, even in the 21st century. Yes?
So in that regard, the dorms are very similar, the buildings are similar. Why is South Dining Hall so different from North Dining Hall?
Okay, South Dining Hall and that's an interesting question. So South Dining Hall and North Dining Hall, I think some of this we could explain in terms of, so South Dining Hall is built just not so long after Rockne. North Dining Hall is a whole different, right, decades later in a whole different universe. It's interesting because a number of other buildings from that vintage of North Dining Hall have, and I'm sure you've noticed this. I've only been at Notre Dame since 2015, so you know far better than I about this. But a number of buildings from the vintage of North Dining Hall have slowly started to disappear, right, and be replaced by newer things. And I think some of that has to do with North Dining Hall is being built at a moment in which the university is expanding tremendously. It's really being thought of as a kind of utilitarian structure, right? As we need to serve this many more students, this many more meals per day. And it also was supposed to harmonize with some plans that existed. These always fascinate the students, plans for things that never happened on our campus. So for instance, not many people know, Frank Lloyd Wright volunteered for free to do a campus plan for us. Nobody knows what happened with that. If he ever did it, or we just lost, we just wrote back and said, no, thank you, I don't know. It's also, but it's a moment in which a quad was being planned as part of north of where Hesburgh Library is now. And it was a quad that was going to have a chapel dedicated to Newman on it that looked like a space saucer. It was something right out of, modernism in the 1960s. And so that, to me, I have always thought of North Dining Hall as part of that moment in which campus was moving in this direction of federal money beginning to come into campuses for the first time, exploding student population, an interest in engaging with basically what's modern rather than what's old and connects us back to these kind of genealogies, real or imagined, that we had through playing sports with some other schools and all the way back to the land of Cambridge and Oxford. Yeah.
You talk about the symbolism on the front of Rockne Stadium or Rockne Building. How do you justify the Naval Academy and the Military Academy on the sides of the doors?
Oh, on the sides of the door. Okay, so what Naval Academy and what the military academies have to do with this? Navy is something that we talk about in our class. We, of course, celebrate them. We play this football game with them every year, right, as you know better than I do, to celebrate this relationship we had, which was they basically saved us, right? They started an officer.
Look at the gate it was built from. It was before that started.
But we already had, so for instance, if you look at the eastern door of the basilica, inscribed there, we have all the names, right, up to a certain date of Notre Dame students and alums who perished. And this idea, this was another way of connecting, can Catholics be true Americans? Well, yes, they can, because we see that they go and fight and die for our country, right? So as part of this argument of, we're not loyal to some foreign ruler, the Pope, we don't listen to the president and follow the laws and then go home, right, and do something different. We're not anti-American in some way just because of our religion. We are full-blooded Americans. And one of the ways that the university made that case, and Catholics in general made that case in America in the early 20th century, is that, and this went back already to the Civil War, that we actively participate in defending this nation in times of crisis through military service, and that Catholics do that just as willingly as any other religious group does in this country. So the story that goes next about Navy is a very wonderful one, because we celebrate them for, we had so few students, many universities were at risk, because of the war. We just didn't have numbers of students to pay tuition and populate these places. So getting a naval officer training program was crucial to the University of Notre Dame, and Father Hesburgh and others really continued to celebrate this important legacy. The one thing that we don't celebrate, or at least I haven't experienced us celebrating, that I think would be worth celebrating, is that's how our campus integrated. The first black students came to Notre Dame through that program. So when we play Navy in football, we should be grateful to them, I think, for some other things too. They did something really, and Notre Dame is not unique in that. So my alma mater, Princeton, same thing. It wasn't Navy. I think it was Air Force. They got an Air Force training program to campus, and that's how the first students of color came to campus. So Notre Dame isn't unique, but I think it's a special bond. Yeah.
How many students' names are in the black book, and has anyone followed up on the students?
It would be fantastic, right? We talk about legacies a lot to find out how many of those people. So I don't know how many total names there are in there. It's a good question. You can go to the archives and see it. They're open. So you can go actually handle and touch this thing. See if there's anybody in there you recognize. One of the things that I'm always struck by in reading it is just how funny it is. That the people who wrote it had real senses of humor. We like to think of those rectors of religion as these strict disciplinarians who never cracked a smile, but they seem to have had fun the couple times they got to write in that book. Yes?
When did they stop entering names into there? And where would we find this book again?
So it's in the university archives is on, I'm not going to get the floor, but I think it's the 7th floor of the Hesburgh Library. 6th, thank you. 6th floor of the Hesburgh Library. So if you go over into the Hesburgh Library, go in the elevator and hit 6, it'll take you right up there. There's no other place you can go except to the archives. We have a remarkable university archives. Most university archives keep papers of presidents and boards of trustees, and that's about it. And then people give them stuff, and they kind of take care of it. We have just had a history of collecting in that archive for a long time, going back really to the 19th century. That is incredible. And so it includes things like, here's one of the boxes we use to move the library, right? Here's Father Sorin's glasses. Here's his Bible. We have incredible things in that archive. So the book was used 1867 to 1877, stops for 2 years, don't know why, and then picks back up again. So the total number of years the book seems to have been active was about 5 years. Why that is, I don't know. It's very clear that it was kept around. It just wasn't used to record names of expelled students anymore. Yeah.
What I have to ask, what did the other kid do on that page? His name is Murphy, he was from Chicago.
Yep.
He described him as a noble youth.
A noble youth, but then he was from the gutter company. He's from a gutter in Chicago, as part of what it says. So what he does, which is fantastic. So the first one gets in trouble, and the second one, I mean, I'm sure many of you, all of you, we've all spent time around children, right? I spent 48 hours with my teenage nieces last weekend, and it was loud. We've spent time with children, right? So the idea is, who did this? Did you do this, or did you do this? And the answer is, nobody's saying anything, right? And so then what do you do next? You're both taking it on the nose, right? And so in this case, the idea is that this second kid, that they just basically wouldn't say anything. So the idea is you're both going together. Since you're such wonderful friends, you can leave together. You're kicked out too. He doesn't seem to have spent time in the South Bend jail, which can you imagine in 1867 having to spend time in the South Bend jail? Must not have been a very fun thing to do. Yes, all the way in the back.
Yeah, what things do you see as the university evolved that shows the French influence and the way in which the French had a great deal of influence, and then it was sort of waning over time, and the tension or whatever between?
That's a great question. So the French influence, obviously Father Sorin French, and brought with him French priests when he came here. Father Sorin, in many ways, remains French in some of his interests. So for instance, he goes to Le Mans, he commissions from these sisters there these incredible stained glass windows we have in our basilica. He also, Father Sorin loved to shop. He liked to go, one of his favorite places to shop were World's Fairs. He would go to World's Fairs and just say, yes, 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 and buy up things. He was a wonderful, there are wonderful letters in the archives where he's constantly being scolded. He gets letters from France saying, stop spending money. You're spending way too much money here. But we have also in the basilica, less noticed when you walk in. So there are 3 altars in succession, but what's used as the high altar now has a 19th century French, beautiful French kind of altar decoration on top of it. That was made in France and purchased at a Philadelphia World's Fair, I think, by Father Sorin. Beautiful enamel, very intricate bronze kind of altar sculpture. So the French are here. They seem to get kind of cast into the shadows, right? Along with the Italian Americans and the various Eastern Europe, all the Polish Americans, all of these other immigrant groups who were here. And when we look at the roles of early student lists at Notre Dame, I have to say, you find Irish names, but you don't find Irish names in the majority. You find a really broad mix of different kinds of people. So the question of exactly how we became Irish, I think is a story that, some details of that story have remained to be told, I think. And why we're not the fighting French or the fighting Italians or something else, that we're the fighting Irish. I think was a decision it was a choice. And it wasn't simply a choice of, well, all the students are Irish American or have Irish blood in some way or another in them. I think some other factors may have gone into that decision. Yes?
Where were you before you came here?
Where was I before I came here? So my first job after graduate school was at which was 20 years ago, was at the University of Colorado at Boulder, and then I went to the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, and then I came here. I'd like to stay.